All right, so I got a couple of different stories here on Israel that I want to combine into one video so I can get it all out for you guys. So I just want to start off with this one here, which is absolutely insane for so many different reasons. They say from the Times of Israel, initial IDF probe, hostages were shirtless, waving white flag when soldiers opened fire. So what they're talking about here is these three guys who were some of the Israeli hostages who were taken by Hamas on October 7th. And as the IDF encountered them in Gaza during one of their operations, they were shirtless to demonstrate that they didn't have any sort of explosive device on them. They were waving a white flag, and one of them was yelling in Hebrew at the soldiers, and they still were executed in cold blood by the IDF. Now we're going to read some of the details here, but the general explanation here that I take away from it, based on the information that we've gotten, is not that the IDF mistakenly thought that these guys were a threat to them, that they were going to blow themselves up or shoot at them or whatever the case may be, but rather that they saw these three guys as Palestinian civilians who they have been routinely killing with absolutely, no consequences whatsoever, with complete impunity for the last couple of months. So they say here from the Times, the IDF provides new details of yesterday's tragic incident in Gaza City's Shijaya neighborhood, during which 3 Israeli hostages who managed to escape Hamas captivity were shot dead by troops. According to a senior officer in the Southern Command citing an initial probe, the incident began after one soldier stationed in a building identified 3 suspicious figures exiting a building several dozen meters away. All 3 were shirtless, with one of the figures carrying a stick with a makeshift white flag, according to the investigation. The soldier, who believed the men moving toward him was an attempt by Hamas to lure IDF soldiers into a trap, immediately opened fire and shouted terrorists to the other forces. So when a couple of guys are walking towards you without shirts, with a white flag waving in the air, that apparently means immediately in your head as an IDF soldier, they're terrorists. They say, according to the probe, that soldier killed 2 of the men, while the third, who was hit and wounded, fled back into the building from which he came. At that stage, the commander of the battalion, who was also in the building from where the soldier shot from, went outside and called on the forces to halt their fire. Meanwhile, sounds of someone shouting help in Hebrew were heard by troops in the area, and moments later, the third man came back out of the building to which he fled, and another soldier opened fire, killing him. The battalion commander then realized that the appearance of the third man was unusual, whatever that means, and it was revealed to be an Israeli hostage. I'm guessing maybe by unusual they mean that this guy looks more like white, he's got the ginger hair and all of that, I guess. So they say all 3 bodies were collected and taken to Israel to be identified. The soldier who immediately opened fire upon identifying the 3 men did so against protocols, as did the second soldier who killed the third man, according to the officer. Still, and here's the key point here, the IDF said that it understands what led the soldiers to do so. It understands what led the soldiers to shoot 3 unarmed men without shirts on, carrying a white flag and yelling in Hebrew. Okay. They also say that the senior officer says that the IDF has not identified any Palestinian civilians in recent days. Think about that statement. This IDF officer is saying, we have not encountered any Palestinian civilians in recent days. Okay? They have already killed over 10,000 children, over 20,000 civilians. A vast majority of those who they have killed have not been Hamas militants, they've been civilians. They've targeted everything under the sun, churches, mosques, schools, UN shelters, refugee camps, everything, okay? And they're saying, oh, we haven't encountered any Palestinian civilians. Well, maybe that's because Israel does not really consider there to be such a thing as Palestinian civilians inside of Gaza. They also say that the officer says that troops have killed at least 38 Palestinian terror operatives in this region in recent days. Okay, so now we continue on to this. There have been massive protests that have taken place in Israel, okay, by some of these people who want the hostages to be brought back to Israel, and some of them are calling for a ceasefire, right? Because, I mean, look, we already have confirmation that Israel killed not only these 3 guys that are Israeli hostages, but probably dozens of others, okay? That's the potential estimate that we're dealing with here, according to Israeli airstrikes and the bombing campaign that they waged at the beginning of this campaign, okay? We've seen some of the hostages who were brought back to Israel as a part of the hostage swap with Hamas that was done a couple of weeks ago, and those hostages went and they confronted Benjamin Netanyahu and said outright, your intelligence is faulty, you don't know where the hell the hostages are, and the places that you were shelling were the places where I was. So we already know that Israel has been shelling the positions that the hostages are in. I think the only realistic conclusion here is that Israel doesn't necessarily care whether or not they kill these hostages. Maybe they would prefer not to, maybe, but their military operation and wiping out Gaza takes priority over bringing back these hostages. Because what would you actually do if you wanted to get all the hostages back? You would negotiate for a ceasefire with Hamas, do a hostage exchange with some of the hostages that Israel has taken over the last couple of weeks, over the last couple of months and years of Palestinians who were taken in the West Bank specifically. You would do a hostage swap deal, you would do a ceasefire deal, and then you could have all of the hostages taken back to Israel. Hamas already put that on the table a long time ago, and they've already demonstrated that they can send hostages back to Israel because that literally happened a couple weeks ago. So that's what you would do if you actually wanted to bring all of these people back. But again, their military operation is taking precedent over that. We also have this here from Kenneth Roth, just to back up that this is a very normal thing that Israel does, shooting people who are holding white flags. Kenneth Roth says that the Israeli government apparently held no one accountable for past instances in which soldiers shot at people waving white flags suggests an impunity that encouraged the war crime killing of 3 shirtless hostages waving the white flag in Gaza. I mean, this has happened countless times. Not just, in this recent bombing campaign since October 7th, in which I have seen numerous examples of people trying to flee hospitals or refugee camps or residential buildings holding white flags, and they are shot at or they are bombed by Israel, but also even way before that. We got so many other examples as well. I mean, this was another one, and I'll bring up, more examples here in a minute, but this was another recent one that I don't think I covered on this channel necessarily, but this was an absolutely insane one that you got to actually watch on video. I can't show it to you guys because it's pretty, gruesome, obviously. It shows a guy getting killed, but this happened just a couple weeks ago. Israeli soldiers have been shooting Palestinians for years with little or no punishment. Just 2 weeks ago, a Jewish Israeli who intervened in a terror attack in Jerusalem was shot dead by IDF soldiers. So what happened in this one is that there was an attack that happened inside of Jerusalem. I think it was at a bus stop, and some guy happened to be on the scene. He pulled out the gun that he had on him, and he shot at some of these guys who were doing the attack. And then some of these IDF troops or police showed up, and the guy threw his weapon on the ground. You can see this, it's all on video. He threw his weapon on the ground. He lifted up his shirt to show that he didn't have any explosives on him, right? And he was begging in Hebrew, saying that, he wasn't the person who was doing the attack. He's just a random civilian, right? And they still shot him in cold blood and then left him there to bleed out and die for minutes without allowing an ambulance to come in. This is what is happening. I mean, it's a perfect example of the violence of an apartheid regime, the violence of an occupational regime being turned on its own citizens. Okay, this is Israelis being treated in the same way that Palestinians have been treated for a very long time. We also have this from the IDF spokesperson on the BBC saying, we're going to support our soldiers. Mistakes happen. Oopsie, we shot a guy, a couple of guys holding a white flag, lifting their shirts up, speaking in Hebrew. Oops, mistakes happen. They're not going to be punished. They're not even punishing the soldiers who did this, right? So, I mean, like earlier they said, oh, well, this goes against our protocols, but we're not going to punish them for any of this shit, let alone even think about punishing them for outright executing and killing Palestinians. But they're also not even going to punish them for killing their own hostages. Think about how insane that is. This was absolutely wild. Okay, so this was a video that was put out sort of as just like a propaganda thing, as a PR, public relations type thing, directly by the IDF on Twitter here. And this is like an IDF commander or whatever speaking to his troops, saying, you see 2 people, they have their hands up without shirts. Take 2 seconds. I want to tell you something just as important. And if it's 2 Gazans with the white flags coming out to surrender, why would we shoot at them? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's not the IDF. Well, it 100% is the IDF. Clearly, you've done it repeatedly with absolutely no consequences whatsoever, whatever that rule is violated or broken. But I mean, focus in on this here, right? He's giving this speech in front of a camera to try to demonstrate to the world, to send a message to the US, to other countries, to be like, look, we're scolding our soldiers, don't kill people who are holding white flags, who are clearly civilians, stop executing civilians. And I mean, look at the guys surrounding. I mean, they're all like laughing their ass off as he's giving this speech. Does it look like any of them are taking this seriously? No, because they know that this is a staged bullshit event. Now I want to move on to this, right? So this was another thing that happened over the last couple of days. We had one of the churches inside of Gaza, okay, that was attacked by Israel. And this is a statement that they put out here. The Latin Patriarchate, I think that's how you say that, of Jerusalem. They say around noon today, December 2023 of the 16th, a sniper of the IDF, murdered 2 Christian women inside the Holy Family Parish in Gaza, where the majority of Christian families have taken refuge since the start of the war. Nahida and her daughter Samar were shot and killed as they walked into the sisters' covenant. One was killed as she tried to carry the other to safety. So we're talking about a sniper here. He can see exactly who these people are. They know exactly what this church is. They know that there's no Hamas there. They're choosing to just pick people off because they can. You're shooting a woman and then shooting another woman as she's trying to drag her friend, her family member, to safety. 7 more people were shot and wounded as they tried to protect others inside the church compound. 7 others. They say no warning was given, no notification was provided. They were shot in cold blood inside the premises of the parish, where there are no belligerents. Earlier in the morning, a rocket fired from an IDF tank targeted the Covenant of the Sisters of Mother Teresa, and the Covenant is home to over 54 disabled persons and is part of the church compound, which was signaled as a place of worship since the beginning of the war. The building's generator, the only source of electricity, and the fuel resources were destroyed. The house was damaged by the resulting explosion and massive fire. 2 more rockets, fired by an IDF tank as well, targeted the same Covenant and rendered the home uninhabitable. The 54 disabled persons are currently displaced and without access to the respirators that some of them need to survive. They also say that in addition, as a result of the heavy bombing in the area, 3 people were wounded inside the church compound last night. Furthermore, solar panels and water tanks, which are indispensable for the survival of this community, were destroyed. So they're also attacking Christian churches, mosques, but also Christian churches as well. And so as a follow-up to that, I want to point out here something that Norm Finkelstein said, and then we're going to get to the Pope's response to this targeting of a Christian church there. But I mean, as Norm points out here, the media reported today in shock that Israeli snipers killed 2 Christian women inside of a church in Gaza. But is that news? Israeli snipers routinely kill unarmed civilians. Here's an example of unarmed Palestinian civilians killed by specially trained Israeli snipers during the overwhelmingly non-violent Great March of Return in 2018, which is when some Gazans decided to do a demonstration to march to the, outskirts of Gaza to try to demonstrate. And what happened during that was just an absolute atrocity. I'll link this down below if you want to go read some of the testimonies here. But I mean, we're talking about dozens of people who were sniped, who were shot at. Completely unarmed people, journalists, medics. There were some Israeli soldiers who were bragging about the amount of kneecaps that they could shoot in one day. Children. I mean, so many people were shot at. This was an entirely peaceful march that was happening. Okay, a demonstration. So keep that in mind when people float around the idea of like, well, why don't Palestinians just protest peacefully or try to engage in a peaceful resolution to this, right? This is what happens when that does happen. And it has happened numerous times, countless times. This is what happens. So this is not anything new. This is routine for the IDF. Now we get to the Pope's response here. So it's pointed out here by Sarah, the direct quote of the Pope Francis. He said, this is terrorism. Okay, talking about these people who were killed. Let's go ahead and listen to the Pope here.
Ricevere da Gaza notizie molto gravi e dolorose. Civili inermi sono oggetto di bombardamenti e spari. E questo è avvenuto persino all'interno del complesso parrocchiale della Santa Famiglia, dove non ci sono terroristi, ma famiglie, bambini, persone malate con disabilità, suori. Una mamma e sua figlia, la signora Navda Khalil Anton e la figlia Samar Qamar Anton, sono state uccise e altre persone ferite dai tiratori scelti mentre andavano in bagno. È stata danneggiata la casa delle suore di Madre Teresa, colpito il loro generatore. Qualcuno dice è il terrorismo, è la guerra. Sì, è la guerra, è il terrorismo.
So there you go. I mean, even the Pope himself is coming out to call out Israel for those actions. We also had here from Ryan Grimm, who was asking specifically about this Pope response. And the State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, said this: "We do not want to see churches, mosques, schools, hospitals attacks, and then he reiterates that the U.S. doesn't support a ceasefire. So, I mean, like, this is such a perfect case study example of the U.S. policy, right? And, you know, credit to Ryan Grimm for pressing him on this issue, but it's just so ridiculous at face value, right? You can go and ask them a question. What do you think about Israel deliberately sniping people inside of a church compound, shooting tank fire at this church compound where there are only civilians? What do you think about that? And they say, well, generally, you know, we're against the targeting of churches and mosques, but we're not going to do literally anything about it to hold Israel accountable. I just talked about a couple weeks ago the Biden administration declaring an emergency to bypass Congress to send Israel more tank fire rounds, okay? More tank shells, more tank ammunition. That's what Joe Biden's administration is doing right now. And then we have them using those tank shells on civilians, including on this church. And then their response is to basically say, well, we don't like it when they do that, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? That's essentially what he's saying here. They have no willingness whatsoever to apply public pressure on Israel, or even private pressure for that matter, in really any way, shape, or form. Because you can finger wag all you want behind the scenes, and you can say, you guys should be more careful about targeting civilians, but if Israel turns around and they give you a double middle finger straight to the face, then what do you do about it? Okay? Then you have to actually use leverage points. You have to withhold aid to Israel, not bypass Congress to send them more weapons and more aid, not try to force through a bill in Congress that is giving them $14 billion more aid on top of the other billions of dollars we already give them on an annual basis. That's not what you do if you care about stopping the civilian casualties, okay? Because that's who these weapons are being used against. So it's just excuse after excuse after excuse. We also had another confirmation here from the Archbishop of Westminster saying he believes the IDF were directly responsible for the deliberate killing of these two innocent churchgoers. He describes the incident as a cold-blooded killing. And so now we get to the Israeli response here. On Channel 4 News last night, Israeli politician Yuli Edelstein, the chair of the Israeli Parliament's Foreign Affairs and Security Committee, so this isn't just some random guy here, this is a high-ranking politician within Israel, said that accusing the IDF snipers of targeting civilians in a church compound is anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic. The words that he used were blood libel, okay? And he said it reminds him of previous, basically, like, pogroms and the Holocaust against Jewish people, okay? That's his response to when he is questioned about Israel killing people in a church, targeting civilians in a church. I mean, how do you even respond to this kind of bullshit? Oh, it's anti-Semitic to point out the war crimes you are committing, or even to ask you about the war crimes that you're committing, right? Israel is perfect. They would never do anything wrong in any way, shape, or form. And if they ever do anything wrong, then it must be the fault of the Palestinians, right? I mean, it's just the most ridiculous, absurd, in-your-face bullshit. I don't understand how Israel got this bad at propaganda. Honestly, before October 7th, I would have thought that they were, like, very good and skilled propagandists. But then I see all of these motherfuckers go on these outlets, and it's, like, pathetic. Like, it is pathetically bad, the kinds of arguments that they are making. And so here's one of the worst ones that I saw. This is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, okay, responding to reports on this Catholic church. Listen to this argument that she is making.
Why is it necessary, is reported, to start shooting, having snipers outside a church?
I saw the reports this morning. The church, there are no churches in Gaza, so I'm not quite sure where the report is talking about.
There's a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because they were driven out by.
Well, respectfully, there are Christians because I spoke to an MP yesterday who has family members in the church who are Christians.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know who was attacked. I didn't see the report.
Okay, I mean, what the fuck? So, first off, notice how at the beginning of her statement, she said, yes, I've seen the reports, and then proceeded to say the dumbest shit you've ever heard in your life, and then ended it by saying, I haven't seen the reports. So she just completely flip-flopped when she realized she didn't know what the fuck she was talking about, and that this guy was actually going to ask a follow-up question, okay, and to press her on the idea. I mean, she literally just said, there are no Christians in Gaza. There are no churches in Gaza. This is like the easiest shit to possibly verify. These are the kinds of arguments that they're making inside of Israel. I mean, just completely delusional. So now we move on to this. This was a different story as well. So this was a guy who I believe works for CNN in their Turkish division, okay, who was just straight up beaten on live TV by Israeli police forces. Let's go ahead and watch this one.
Hiçbir şey ayırt etmiyorlar ve şu an tetiği çekti. Silahın ucuyla vurdu. Muhtemelen evet. Müdahaleler tam olarak böyle oluyor değerli izleyenler. Bakın silahın tetiğini çekti. Vur beni dedi. Arkasını döndü gazeteci. Boğazını sıktı ve yere yatırdı. Görmüş olduğunuz gibi çok sert müdahaleler var. Çok sert müdahaleler var. Çok sert müdahaleler var. İşte gazeteci, Müslüman, sivil ayırt etmeksizin buna benzer silahın ucuyla çok sert vurdu. Halil
I mean, what do you even say about this? Now, obviously, we've talked about so many different journalists being targeted, but I mean, look at how brazen they are about it. They're on live TV. They know they're on TV. They know they're being taped right now. This is what they're willing to do, okay? Beating him, hitting him with the butt of their rifle, throwing him to the ground, kicking him in the head multiple times, kneeing on him. This is what they do to journalists, okay? We also had this follow-up here from Wael Dadou. So this is one of the best journalists that I've seen on the ground. I think he works for Al Jazeera. And he has been relentlessly covering everything that has been happening on the ground in Gaza. And he had his family that was targeted by an Israeli strike and had family members who were slaughtered. Okay, and he went back out into the field, continuing to work. And then there was another event where apparently, according to him, the IDF told him that a certain place was safe to go to, and then they were targeted when they went to that place. And his fellow journalist who was with him at the time, Samir Abu Daka, was killed in this. He was injured in this, severely injured in this, and then basically almost immediately went straight back out to report in the field on his colleague's death and his funeral here. I mean, you can see him here with the bandages on both of his arms. I think he was shot numerous times. And so, I mean, credit to this guy, but I mean, Jesus Christ, how much more can a human being go through? I mean, telling the stories of the people in Gaza, vitally important for obvious reasons. But I mean, holy shit. I mean, this guy is going to be, you know, unfortunately, I think one of the guys who is continuously targeted by Israel because of the powerful messages he's been able to get across. Now, we also had this part of it, a different story, which is just also insane and gives you a perspective on some of the conversations happening in Israel. So this was a real thing, again, as pointed out here by Sanaa. Today, in things casually said by Israeli political figures, Israel should make Gaza look like Auschwitz. Seriously. So let's read a little bit of this. They say, after October 7th, so this is a statement here from the council head, David Azulai, okay? And he said this on 103 FM. He said this on the radio, right? After October 7th, instead of urging people to go south, we should direct them to the beaches. The Navy can transport them to the shores of Lebanon, where there are already sufficient refugee camps. Just completely ethnically cleanse Gaza. Then, a security strip should be established from the sea to the Gaza border fence, completely empty, as a reminder of what was once there. It should resemble the Auschwitz concentration camp. Okay? That's some of the stuff that's being said. We also had this here from Common Dreams. Witnesses say that the IDF troops executed women and children in a Gaza school. Eyewitness testimony reported Wednesday by Al Jazeera accused Israeli troops of massacring forcibly displaced women and children sheltering at a school in northern Gaza, an allegation that prompted a leading U.S. Muslim advocacy group to demand a response from President Joe Biden. Now, Biden obviously has been, tanking off of a cliff with young people, with Muslim communities in the United States as well, in terms of their support for him since October 7th. But I mean, again, this isn't anything new. It's not necessarily surprising. But, we're talking about women, children, babies who were executed at this school, who were taking refuge in the north of Gaza, according to eyewitness testimonies. We also have this, and I'll finish off with this here. According to the Washington Post, Gaza, smashed by Israeli airstrike, sees a new threat, disease, and they go in and they tell the story of a specific woman, Abu Taima, who has a thyroid cancer and is going through her own struggles as well, and has children who she's worried about because the conditions that a lot of the people in Gaza have been put in. Obviously, we're talking about over, at this point, 1.8 million of the 2.3 million who lived in Gaza have been internally displaced, okay? And so what happens when your home is turned to rubble and dust? Well, you're forced to go somewhere else, right? And a lot of the places they have been forced to go into are essentially like makeshift tents, right? And I've seen some of the videos that have come out of some of these places, especially after you get any sort of rain or any sort of weather. And we're talking about, just basically mud as the floor and a flimsy tent as sort of your walls and your ceiling. And, obviously you have on top of that some cold conditions, and you have a condition that is basically guaranteed to bring about increased spread of disease. And so this is another aspect of this that is going to come into light as time progresses, as time goes on, and especially as we head closer and closer towards winter, obviously. And so this is another thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on. I mean, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but it's only getting worse and worse and worse. And we could end up with a significant outbreak of something like cholera or any other number of diseases that could ravage the people who have been densely packed into some of these basically refugee camps inside of Gaza. So I'm going to leave off with that. Obviously, a lot of brutal, horrific, depressing stuff that is continuing to happen right now. But, continue to put on the pressure. Continue to try to talk about these things and bring these things to light, because this is not going to end unless our government, the United States government, decides to put a foot down and actually apply pressure on Israel to stop this slaughter. I mean, I've talked about so many different times the true intentions, according to these statements of Israeli politicians, of guys like Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and the rest of them, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister. You can go and look at their own statements. It's very clear what their goals are here. It is to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. It is to brutalize the Palestinian people and to kill as many Palestinians as they can possibly get away with under the guise of this sort of anti-Hamas operation that they're conducting right now. And this is going to be something that is never going to be the same again after this. But in the immediate sense, obviously, the most important thing is to just stop the endless bloodshed.